Nissan describes the all-new 7th generation Z as retaining its authenticity as a pure sports car while also being upgraded with the latest technology to keep you connected to your life. Now, all that sounds great, but I took away two words from that: authentic and modern. Now, why is that? Well, because what are we looking for in iconic cars like the Nissan Z? We want them to remain authentic, true to their roots on what got them to this point, and also to upgrade using modernization, giving me the latest mechanical technology to make the car better. So let's see if Nissan stayed true to their promise by exploring this, the latest Nissan Z. So let's start off by talking about the trim levels and the pricing for this new Z. So the one I have here today is a base sport with a 6-speed manual transmission. There are 3 trim levels for the new Z: the Sport like this one, Performance, and Nismo. All of them are rear-wheel drive, and all except for the Nismo can be had with a manual transmission. So the base price starts at $44,100 and ranges up to $66,000 for the range-topping Nismo. Now, on paper, the Performance trim with a manual transmission seems like the enthusiast spec, but it's $10,000 more than a base Sport with a manual. Now, the reason why I wanted to drive the base version is I wanted to find out if I could save $10,000 and still be happy. Next, let's talk about one of the coolest things about this new Z, its design. Now, every angle of this car has a slight resemblance to a Z that came before it. The front end looks like the 240. The overall profile with the long hood, the low stance, the overall sports car silhouette looks like the first generation Z. And then out back, the wide hips flow nicely into the taillight design that says 300ZX all over it. This Z is seriously an attractive car, not only because of its simple design, but how it's been executed. Is the design authentic? Absolutely. What do you think about it? Now let's talk about what's underneath the hood. And speaking of the hood, why does this car not have hood struts to hold the thing up? I mean, we're in 2024 and we've got a stick to hold up the hood. I mean, it just looks out of place. But anyway, let's put that to the side and let's talk about the engine. So this is a 3-liter twin turbocharged V6 that generates 400 horsepower and 350 pounds-feet of torque. It redlines at 6,800 RPM and is connected to a 6-speed manual or 9-speed automatic transmission, putting power down to the rear wheels only. Now, I'm really glad that Nissan continues to offer a 6-speed manual in the Z, but one thing I am going to complain about is the fact that they're not including rev match upshift, downshifts, or launch control in the base trim level. This should be standard across the entire Z lineup. Now let's get back to talking about the engine, and one interesting thing about it is that yes, it is a front engine car, but it's officially a front mid-engine layout, meaning that the engine is sitting on top of the front axle or slightly behind it, and this is all for weight balance and better weight distribution. And speaking of weight, the base car I have here with a manual comes in the lightest at 3,486 pounds, which is 63 pounds less than the automatic version and 50 pounds less than the Performance with the 6-speed manual. The suspension is riding on fixed monotube dampers, so no adaptive shocks here. They're sitting on 18-inch wheels on the base model and 19-inch rays if you opt in for the Performance trim. Brakes are also smaller in the base trim, 12.6 inches with 2-piston calipers up front and single piston in the rear. So now let's move to the interior, talk about what's going on in here, and then we'll go out for a drive. So starting out with the seats. So given that this is the base trim level, you get a cloth-covered manual seat. In the Performance trim, you get a electronic, partially leathered covered seat that's also heated. Now let's talk about this base seat. So it's comfortable, the cushioning is good. The cloth has a houndstooth style pattern to it, which makes it look very cool. And overall, the aggression of the seat is good as well. Even though the side and thigh bolsters are both fixed, they hold you in pretty nicely. Overall size, I'm sitting at 5'11". I do have maybe an inch or two of headroom on top of my hair. The seat is in its lowest position, and I would imagine somebody a couple inches taller than I am will not have any issues in terms of legroom because the seat can go further back than where it is now. Now switching to technology, there are two screens in here. One in front of the driver, which measures 12.3 inches. The graphics look modern and cool, and overall, they're easy to use and they're simple. Next, moving to the second screen in the center stack. This base model gets a 8-inch screen. The Performance gets a 9-inch screen. Now, they're both touchscreen enabled and the response to touch is good. The software has the ability to run Android Auto wired or Apple CarPlay wirelessly, and the base infotainment system is decent. Now, it's extremely simple. Don't expect anything flashy. Some of the graphics may even look a little dated, but it's easy to use and easy to get used to. Now, hinting to the authenticity piece, you can't have a Z interior without a 3-pod gauge cluster. And I'm glad to see that it's maintained here in this new 7th generation. It displays boost, turbo speed, and voltage. It's pointed directly at the driver, and it's just such a cool thing to look at and gives the interior that Z character that you're really looking for. Finally, the trunk. It's got 6.9 cubic feet of space in there. I would imagine you can probably fit a larger suitcase in here, but no issues in terms of daily drivability, and it's always nice to have the ability to throw things in the trunk directly from inside the cabin. But overall, I would say the interior is subpar in terms of quality. It feels like it was built to a specific price point, and then the money was spent in other areas of the car outside of the interior quality. I do feel like there's some room for improvement and maybe even an argument to jump up to the Performance trim or the Nismo, where you get a little bit more leather and stitching and things like that. So overall, I would say the base trim level is okay, more function over form. But that's pretty much all I've got to say for the interior. Now let's get to the good part and see what this thing feels like behind the wheel. All right, so inside the Z now, let's go ahead and turn this thing on and see what it feels like to drive. Start, stop here on the upper left next to the shifter. Fires up, not too much drama. Let's give it a quick exhaust check. Not too bad. So let's see what this Z is all about. And it's a little misty outside, so I'm going to try and be a little careful today. All right, so as you set off in the Z, one of the things I noticed is that I wish the driving position was a little bit lower. And I don't know if this is a tribute to the manual seat in the base car, and I don't know if it's any different in the Performance Pack automatic car, but nonetheless, I wish I sat a little bit lower to give me that sports car feel. Not that it doesn't feel sporty in here, it feels nice and tight. The hood feels short out in front of me, but yeah, that's one thing that I would improve upon. Now, because this is the base car and it's got the manual shifter, I don't have the rev matching. I don't have any drive modes. For some people, this is a good thing, but I don't have anything to toggle on or off. So with that, let's just go ahead and see what this has got. Oh yes, spinning the wheels. Yeah, this is pretty fun. Let's see. Oh yeah, go Z, go, yes. Look at this thing roll. Man, this thing's plenty of momentum. And unfortunately, there's a lot of traffic here on the mountain road today, so I'm gonna be a little limited. Rev match, really nice. Just do it on your own, I suppose, if you can't afford to have the software do it for you. But from a speed standpoint, this thing carries a lot of momentum and it's pretty quick. I'll put it to you that way. From a driving experience standpoint, the induction noise is nice. So the 3-liter, I don't know if it's being pumped in or if the engine is actually making all that induction noise, but it gives a great driving experience or feedback towards the driving experience. The thing that's a little lacking, I feel like the exhaust. This is kind of begging for an aftermarket exhaust. But from a momentum, speed, quickness standpoint, I think this is plenty fast enough. It pulls hard to redline, and even though it's a twin turbocharged 3-liter motor, I feel the urgency of it is good as well, whether you're pulling to red line or whether you're just going from a stoplight in the lower gears at lower speeds. It's a plenty urgent enough motor to get your blood pumping in any driving situation. And I had read about the speed, from a speed acceleration standpoint, that this is somewhat underwhelming. I call that nonsense, in my opinion. I don't agree with it at all. I feel like the pace this car carries, the speed sensation that you get, and the overall experience with the induction noise, I think this is a plenty fast enough car. Anybody who tries to convince you otherwise, I say hold your judgment until you drive it. Rev match a second. Let's see here again. 7,000. Okay, yeah, this is, I mean, like, how could this be called a slow car? The pace it carries is just, I mean, yeah, it's not slow. Not slow by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, let me switch over and talk about the rest of the dynamics, so the shifter and the clutch. So the shifter, I really like it a lot. It's got a good amount of mechanical feel, so as you're rolling through the gears, you can feel the sensation in your hand, and that's what I really like. And that's obviously what you're looking for in a manual transmission car. Yeah, okay, yes, yeah. So it's nice to shift through the gears when you're driving fast. The feel that it gives you is good. Now, switching over into the clutch. So this is one of the few cars that I actually stalled as I was getting used to the clutch. It happened when I was going in reverse. And the reason for it is because I feel that the clutch engagement, even though it's good, I feel like there's some vagueness there. And subjectively, I like a clutch pedal grab point to be kind of in the mid to mid-high area in the travel point. I feel like this one is a little too high for my liking, but again, that's just my preference in clutch pedal feel, so it might be different for you. But the overall clutch is extremely light and mostly easy to use, sans what I just mentioned. So now let's talk about the brake. The brake pedal, even though these are the smaller brakes, I feel like this has an adequate amount of braking power given the amount of horsepower that the Z has. So I'm not concerned about the smaller brakes that you get in the base versus the bigger ones you would have gotten in the performance variant. So I'm going to keep it at that nice and short. Let's switch over into the steering and the suspension. Let's combine these two. I think it's razor sharp and really accurate, actually. And one of the stronger points from this car, it's darty and has little to no vagueness in terms of steering input. You give it the input and it's basically going in that direction pretty urgently, actually. Now, switching it over into the suspension is actually tuned nicely, and I think what Nissan has done is try to get a balance with driving up here and also driving in the city. So from a daily drivability standpoint, when I was driving it around prior to filming this, I think it's really compliant. Driving over bumps, things like that, it's not like a regular four-door sedan, but it's pretty compliant and more than adequate enough to be able to be driven on a daily basis. And then when you come up here, the tuning is good as well for sporty driving like this. The only thing that I would improve upon is the steering. When I load it up and I'm going into corners like this, I get the sensation that it gets a little too heavy, and given that there are no modes in the base version, I feel that I don't have enough adjustability here, and I might loosen it up just a little bit, just a tiny bit, and I'm really nitpicking here because it still feels neutral in terms of steering feedback and the overall steering feel. So, from a driving dynamic standpoint, this is a fun car. In the base variant, I have no concerns in terms of the funness, in terms of speed, in terms of handling. It feels like a nice sports car that you would be able to drive up here and get your blood pumping, and also to be able to drive on a daily basis and not get beat up, even with a manual shifter. So that's pretty much all I've got for driving dynamics. Now let's wrap it up with some final thoughts. So that's the new Nissan Z. First question, is the base model good enough? I think the answer to that is yes, because the extra stuff that you get in the performance trim isn't really necessary for daily driving or to have fun. Sure, you could make an argument for the rev match upshift and downshift or the mechanical limited slip differential in the rear, but with the $10,000 you'll be saving, you can probably spend some of that on some more exciting modifications. Now, the second question, and the one I asked at the outset, is it authentic and modern? And I think the answer to this is yes as well. The design still has cues from Zs that come before it. The interior still has the 3-pod gauge cluster but is modernized with screens. And in terms of driving, it's still lightweight by today's standards, or somewhat lightweight by today's standards. It still comes with a manual transmission, and it's fun to drive. So that's all I've got. If you've got any questions about the new Z, please leave me a comment down below or send me a message on Instagram at DriveSteady. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Otherwise, thank you for watching this video. Until next time, drive steady.